government's preference is definitely that another owner comes in. I mean, Rex was operating profitably before its misadventure into the capital city markets. But if we were looking realistically, the government is going to have to be there in some way, certainly in a transition, if not permanently, in some of the very thin and difficult routes that Rex has been serving.
Okay, so looking at the economics of this, you would say this is the sort of instance where there is a role for government?
Yeah, and it's not an unusual thing. There are other countries like Australia with a thin population and big distances, in Canada, in Finland, where it's not unusual for governments to provide some financial support. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a government needs to own an airline to do that. It may be that for some markets that are so thin that they're not commercially viable, but are important to be connected, that governments around the world underpin the operating cost of some of those routes.
So if that last resort eventuates and the government does acquire Rex, could that see changes to the airline? I mean, what would be top of mind for the airline?
Looking at it from an outside perspective, the fleet is really quite old. The subs are getting towards the end of their lifetime. There are not easy natural replacements for that aircraft. The one that comes to mind for me is an ATR-42. That's a somewhat larger airplane. It would need an extra flight attendant. It would trigger the security clearance requirements at remote airports. So it would bring not just the capital cost of a new fleet, but also operating costs would increase for that operation. And I think that's part of the difficulty looking at, would I like to buy Rex, is do I want to take on the responsibility of refleeting that airline in the reasonably near term to keep operating to some of those thin routes.
Can and I guess would the government try to make this a more attractive sale for a potential buyer?
I think for a potential buyer to see that the government is prepared to underpin those remote markets that need air service but may not be commercially viable really would be an important element of someone making that decision.
And of course we also have a federal election coming up. There could be a change of government. Would this complicate matters?
I don't think so. I think there's pretty much a clear view from both sides of politics that Rex has, or an airline doing what Rex currently does, has a role to play in Australia, that we need to be able to connect remote places, whether it's for medical services or people getting to university or families being able to join up. There is a need for those remote services, and whether they're commercially viable or not, there is a role for an airline to connect those places, and governments of, I think, either persuasion would be prepared to underpin some of those basic services.